I'm gonna be taking point on the next one here, and it is one of the ones that were a little bit more on the front line, a little bit more floating around on social media um, before the season hit, and it was called Chitose is in the Ramune bottle, also known as Chitose-kun or Ramune bin no Naka, also abbreviated as Chiramune. So this is a Studio Feel series, or adapted by Studio Feel. Um, and the original is, I believe, a light novel original. It was published by Shigakukan. And the story is by Hiromu. This is their first work, I believe, and illustrated by Rames. So, uh, Studio Feel, just going back to Studio Feel for the anime adaptation, you guys know Feel. Feel is a very relatively famous studio, right? You guys know them for their work on stuff like the Capo, Yusuke no
The
Sora,
Kappa. Wow, that's a throwback.
yeah, Minamike, Oragairu, Konobi, Tsuki ga Kirei, a lot of these stuff. Last season, or a couple of seasons back, they did, previous seasons they did Spy Classroom and Summer Pockets. That's their more recent stuff.
Yo,
And
Shikabane
this
Hime? Hell yeah, this studio feels classic now.
Yeah. And this season, they're doing a combination of this one and Chanto Suenai Kyuketsuki-chan, right? Little Miss Vampire Can't Suck Right, I believe, is the transliterary
Arctic
title here.
Yeah, right.
So Field Studio is multitasking a little bit for both, but I think they've done pretty decently in terms of audio visuals on both series, so that's pretty good. Um, in terms of the cast, or in terms of the staff, rather, the producer Takikasaki Makoto, alongside I want to say an up and comer director in Tokune Yuji, which he has some decent experience with stuff like storyboarding and episode direction, but this is, I think, his first full directorial debut. So it is interesting that they are giving him this role while having a lot of money backing this project. So, but the two brings together a very, very heavily experienced team from here and there to form the project team for Chiramune. They brought a decent amount of people from outside the studio, but in general, if you just look through the names, Arakawa Naruhisa, what is it? Music done by Fuchisa Yoshiaki. He did stuff like Love Live, I think. I forget if he did like some ReZero stuff. There's just like a lot of things that he did. I think he did some like Yuri stuff and Romcom stuff as well. Um, a lot of these, Kinoshite Sumie, a lot of these people are quite experienced at what they do, are very heavy veterans. So they brought those together to form this very relatively trusty engine for the project team. The Seiyu, the voice acting cast, is almost just as heavily experienced. It has a lot of big names, a decent amount of younger, sort of recent, I want to say B A-listers, right? Out of these, so obviously you have Monica Yomi, who did, I believe, Rise Shower, and then I believe her more famous role, right, is, excuse me, Akane in Akane Kurosawa in what is it? In Oshinoko, right? And I believe she did one other role, but I think she did Misakai Aoba in Idolmaster as well. You have, um, Anzai Chika, obviously extremely famous, Kosuka Reina and Hibiki Euphonium. Yomiya Hina, very much like rising star here in the past couple of years. She did Inui Shinju in Beast Doll, as well as Osana Yuki, more recently in Shoshimin. You have Hasegawa Ikumi. I don't think I need to really mention her, right? She did Kita and Bocchi the Rock. And Okubo Rumi, obviously Mihono Bourbon, Uma Musume, as well as she did, I think, a couple other uh, roles. I keep forgetting. I'm very bad at this. I apologize, but yeah. So Oh yeah, she did Memcho, and Oshinoko. And I believe Chinatsu is probably her most famous role. Chinatsu Yoshikawa and Yuru Yuri. So, a lot of big heavy hitters. I would say probably the least famous out of these is actually generally the male two members. So we have um, Sakato Shogo, who has a decent amount of roles, and then we have, I think, Masai Miyazaki, who I think has done one like Idolmaster male side role, but is like pretty much a newcomer otherwise. So, um, pretty much composed of just as many veterans and heavy hitters as the staff, which is definitely promising. Going on to the OPED and the audio visuals here. The opening is Liar by Kuchi. So Kuchi is a J-pop, J-rock singer-songwriter from Nagoya. I believe she's quite young, born in 2004-ish, if I remember correctly from her wiki page. The vocals are very good. The composition kind of is pretty good and matches her energy. Pretty reminiscent of kind of 2000s, 2010s J-rock here. And in terms of the storyboarding, while I want to say the storyboarding is average to slightly above average in terms of just design and structure, the quality is just like super solid overall. I want to say comparing to most of the other openings that I've like seen and scrolled through, it's probably top two openings of the season overall. I think the only opening that the um Chitose-kun opening would lose to is probably the Sanda opening. But other than that, I think all the other openings are just like definitely like hit like a level below the Chitose-kun opening. So pretty good opening overall, and I would almost like definitely be able to put it up for like season contender. The ending theme is Kagero by Cider Girl. For those of you who don't know, Cider Girl is a J rock band out of Tokyo. They also did, I believe, Cinderella, which is the opening for Komi-san. Overall, again, another one with pretty good vocals and composition, as well as pretty good storyboarding. Honestly, the way the ending's quality and storyboarding is, the ending for Chitose-kun is better than most openings this season, which is kind of sad, but it's just the truth. The quality of both the opening and the ED in terms of like the actual design, the frames, the animations are way better than like pretty much all of the other openings and endings this season. Just straight up. It's kind of it's pretty whack. The In terms of like the overall episodes, the BGM is pretty solid. I think the visuals overall keep their quality throughout the episodes, and it's on. I wouldn't say it's like on parity necessarily with the opening, uh, in terms of like animations, but like the static design, the static models, the in betweens, the stills, keep their quality pretty well. Although obviously, again, you have to consider that it is a slice of life series and not a constantly moving around action battle kind of series, right? So they have some of that, but the character designs, the static models, the in betweens, the stills are all pretty decently done. Um, but there are some slight portions where there are like some non-important scenes, some of the supporting cast, stuff like that. Um, and some scenes where the protagonists or like the harem aren't like fully in focus.
Mhm.
Those tend to be a little bit more obviously budget, like kind of like not a full sore thumb, but it's just like, oh, they clearly just like didn't really put any money into this kind of business. But the other parts are almost like when they do have the protagonists and the girls in the harem in full focus, it is like they almost try to do these like weird Akiyuki Shimbo, like Shimbo Akiyuki kind of like level cuts, um, where they're like cutting to the mouth, like the person is saying something, right? It's like a phrase, and it's like does like a slow zoom into the mouth or to the eyes or like to like random place, like some random tower or whatever, stuff like that. There's like a very like weird like Shaft-esque like homage almost like to some of these cuts, and um It's an interesting choice, certainly, but it's definitely not low quality. So I do appreciate at least the level of quality that they maintain throughout the episodes. So that's it for the audio visuals. I would say it's probably top notch compared to again most of the other series in this season. I think very few top it outside of again something like Asanda. So that's that. In terms of the story, and this is where things get a little bit ugly. So the general story is you have this protagonist, Chitose-saku, and Chitose-saku is just like your ideal ubermensch, perfect guy, jock, the hot like number one in the school, does sports, is smart, max with all the girls. Obviously, isn't like a lecturer or anything like that, but like he gets all the ladies. He has the riz, all that stuff. He has a lot of really good friends. Blah 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 blah. And then it's essentially you have these mini arcs in the anime about him kind of seeing all these people outside of his like kind of direct network or even sometimes within his direct network where it's not things aren't as perfect as he would like for instance his life and his network to be, right? There are people outside where outside of his network or people that are sometimes related to his network that sometimes have these like mental issues with dealing with either him or not being super popular or super cool like him, so they have issues, and he gets kind of wrapped up in these like problems and he kind of needs to solve them. So it is somewhat similar in structure to something like Oregairu, right? um but the difference is obviously instead of in Oregairu where Hachiman is sort of the loner, he's like everybody's like, oh, get out of here, he's just like some weirdo, and then the weirdo kind of comes in and solves the problems, right? Which is a little bit more power fantasy setting. um the author for Chitose-kun tried to make a variant where the protagonist is the obvious, like, oh, I'm the jock, I'm the popular dude, I'm already with the girls, I've got everything straightened out. But with that, he has to solve the problems where it's like everybody's like hating on him constantly. He's just like, oh man, all he does is like just like he has his harem and he has his life all settled. He was that way ever since he was born. um you know i'll I'll never be like him. He's so like all this jealousy, whatever stuff like that, or all these other like matters related to him and his harem or whatever, right? And he has to solve these problems, right, from the perspective of being a jock, from being the popular guy at the school, right? So that's sort of the variant the author tries to spin. Um, and my thoughts on the story and just kind of generally kind of how it's structured is a couple of bullet points. And first, I just want to say, and I speak as a person who is, I think, out of everybody here, Toast included, I think I'm the most tolerant of harem series, like the general harem, like tool, like right, the subgenre, literary device, whatever, and how it's used slash weaponized slash whatever, right? And even as that sort of person, I think I'm really not a fan of how the harem aspect is kind of shoehorned in here. And in Chitose-kun, it's a lot um yes, the premise is that the protagonist is popular and he's already kind of got his fingers in the various jars, right? And he's macking on all the girls, and like all these four however many different girls are like him a lot, right? And have a crush on him or whatever. But the way it's like structured, it doesn't feel like that premise is like a thing. You know what I mean? It's just like it really just feels like the way the harem is set up is just like, oh, they just, the harem is set up because the author just likes harem, or the author just thinks, oh, harem is just like a popular thing, so I think this story should have harem, which is really annoying because I think if the way I kind of think about it is like, and this is sort of why harem stories tend to fall into these tropes where you you kind of nab each girl, right, by saving their metaphorical cat, right, from a tree, and being like saving them, rescuing them from something, or helping them with XYZ things, right, and then you get each girl one at a time. I apologize for using object related terms, but that's sort of what happens, right? Um, but the whole point is like you have to show that the character kind of like did something or is a person where there's like a reason for all these like characters to kind of like him, right? Especially when it's not a situation like in Japanese anime, you have a protagonist who's just like relatively plain black hair protagonist, obviously partly for self-insert purposes, but then all these girls just like magically fall in love with him, right? And it's not even just like an aesthetics thing. They have to show the story often, the anime often has to show that there's some sort of personality related reason, right? Because obviously you you're not gonna have an anime character look like, uh, you know, fucking Tom Cruise or whatever, right? And then and that's the reason why all the girls like him or whatever it is, right? So the reason has to be a little bit more, but it doesn't really show that. So it kind of just feels like the harem at that point where the protagonist just lands in is the harem is just being shoehorned in because the author again likes harem or thinks just the harem series is popular or whatever it is, right? So I really don't like that part of the series. And again, I say this as a person who is extremely tolerant of the harem structure in general, in anime, manga, whatever. The second part of this is that, and this kind of is like a general point, I guess I want to say, is that the characters are supremely unrealistic in a premise where it needs to be as realistic as possible. So this whole like premise is something that has is starting to be explored more and more and more, right? And not just like Oregairu and all that fucking bullshit because I hate Oregairu, but something like lookism, right, will probably be the most famous example, where you're talking about like how does society treat people when they're nerds versus jocks, when they're ugly versus not ugly, and it's like, is it real like the popularity is that just like you just got to win the genetic lottery, or like do you have to work hard, or like um perception versus whatever versus reality versus what are people actually suffering, all this sort of stuff, right? And that requires a very gentle, smooth, realistic kind of guidance from the author, because these are very real topics, and a lot of people who are reading these sorts of series have experienced those very same thoughts and feelings and experiences, right? But this author does a pretty fucking terrible job of doing it because of at least a couple of reasons. Um, the first obvious reason is that all these characters are too, like all the protagonists and stuff like that are just too kind, right? And like in general, people are okay with like helping other people in real life, but it's a lot of it's just like, I'm gonna spend like a week like helping you out, and then I'm gonna always be there for you, my guy. Like there's a lot of these sorts of like situations where it's like, oh, the protagonist just like did everything perfectly and solved this social situation just like without like any blemishes to his record or something like that. And it's a very um like there's nothing negative about the protagonist's personality, stuff like that, and it's very like not a thing that people would really experience or recognize in real life. And then all the girls are like that too, and it's like it's just like uh, part of the solution process for the mini arc seemed to be, oh, this like mental problem's happening, and like the problem itself is relatively realistic, right? Somebody's getting bullied, or there's like a stalker or whatever it is, right? But then the solution process is just like, I will be super positive and I will work very hard. And it's just like, no, that's not really like, that's not always how it gets solved in real life, right? And then leading on from that, I think the the bigger issue is that I think the author just does not have knowledge of how a lot of these social interactions work in real life. I think it is very obvious that this author lived a relatively regular school life or lived a kind of isolated school life, but was never in like kind of has never interacted in a setting with these like nerds and jocks and having to do the whole like, oh, you're popular versus I'm not, I'm like maybe like a nerdy or recluse or fat or whatever it is, right? Ugly, whatever, this, that, and the other. I can't get the girlfriend, you can get the girlfriend, all that shit, right? And the reason why I know that is because this author tries to kind of cast this paradigm as like, and the variant, right, of this paradigm as like nice versus not nice. And it was a very similar pattern with Oregairu too, right? Where it was like, with Oregairu, it was like the nerds and the weirdos were actually the ones that ended up being nice and the ones that will find out the truth right behind the matter. And the jocks and the idiots were the ones, and the Ryujus and whatever were the ones that were stupid, and we had to defeat them. And this author said, okay, well, let me put a variant on that. What if the jocks actually were nice, but then the nerds, kind of had a misunderstanding, and then the jocks kind of had to resolve that misunderstanding? But what I want to say is that this paradigm is just completely wrong. And they would know that if they had interacted in society at all, like in school or society with these sorts of people, where it's not about the whole nice and not nice thing. I think at least with my personal experience, with some exceptions, most people at least are willing to somewhat uh, lend a hand, right? Especially if they're in the eyes of their peers or whatever it is, right? Or something with regards to something small or whatever it is, right? And there's nobody that's like, I'm going to be an asshole. Like inherently, right? Like they have a lot of these like personality quirks that kind of lead into it, but there are not many people in this world that are just like, I will fuck you, fuck your mom. It's like that's not how this world works, right? But the important part of this, and which is what kind of distinguishes the whole like helps define the whole like nerd versus jock paradigm, I want to say interaction, whatever, is that people just don't care enough. In the real world, people just don't care that much. And this is also what I tell, some of my junior people, some of the people that, work for me, whatever, when they're setting up for presentations, an important thing is you don't have to be worried about making mistakes in presentations or pausing in presentations because nobody gives a shit. Nobody really cares that much about your presentation. Like, calm down, bro. You're not that important. And that's just how it is with all these nerds versus jocks versus whatever, where it's not that the jocks are necessarily like, it's not like that Spider-Man like those older like Spider-Man movie scenes where they're Peter Parker is getting shoved into the locker kind of thing. It's just they don't care. They will just brush past you, and they'll just say something like, oh, whatever, this guy just blah blah blah. And they'll ignore the nerd, and that'll really be sort of the thing that hurts people, right? It's the banality of evil, the banality of cruelty, where it's just like people just get ignored, people just get isolated. Oh, whatever, like just brush that guy aside, blah blah. And the jocks and the popular kids and the valedictorians and the prom queens, the prom kings will just go on living their lives, and they're just doing their thing and partying, and all the nerds will be. That's the real sort of like dichotomy that comes out, and not this whole like anime, oh, the jocks are not nice versus the nerds are actually really nice inside. That's a very like I don't know. It's a very like it's a very exaggerated paradigm that I think I don't really know. I think it just gets like because there are certain cases of it, but I think that sort of paradigm gets exaggerated. And because that sort of paradigm is so accentuated in Chiramune, in a place like Oregairu, whatever, I think it just becomes like this doesn't feel realistic at all. Because in real life, people don't care this much. People don't go like, oh, I'm a kind jock. I will help this nerd. That's not what happens. They just brush past by his side. Or it's not like Oregairu where it's like, or some of the mob cast members of Chiramune where they're like, I'm a jock, or I'm a Yankee, I'm a hooligan. I'll fuck your shit up. It's not like that. They just don't care. Like they don't fucking care. And this inability of the Oregairu author, this inability of the Chiramune author to understand that is very unfortunate and really dulls their storytelling and makes it almost distasteful, I want to say. It's very unfortunate because I think this premise is, or not premise, this theme of like, okay, like, but what if maybe a jock was occasionally paid attention enough to somebody like a nerd or whatever, enough to lend a hand, right? We'll be the sort of like interactions that result from that, and then have like the cast slowly built. I think that'll be an interesting premise, but that's not what this story is. That's not what Oregairu is. It always has to be this dichotomy of like the evil, the asshole, the whatever, the popular jocks that just want to flex and ruin your life versus the nerds that are so sincere and whatever, blah blah blah. And it always has to be this like whack ass extreme dichotomy. And I just don't think that's interesting in the year 2025 going into 2026. It just sucks. It's boring. It's not representative of real world, and that not being representative of the real world is important in this case because this is a very close to real life premise and theme and series. So, very disappointing, I think, overall. And I like as I was watching this, I was just like, I the author has never been in like a school setting before or something, because else you wouldn't write like this. You just wouldn't write like this. I don't understand. Like the author had to have been in a private school or something. It's very weird.
Have you ever considered he watched Grease?
Have you ever
1978.
Yeah. Have you ever considered that he traveled forward in time when he was a kid and watched Oregairu, and then went back and he was like, "I'll do it better."
I'll do better. But then he procrastinated way too long, and then Oregairu came out, and he was like, "Fuck, shit."
Yeah. But
I guess I'll write it anyway.
You kind of understand what I'm talking about, though, right? Where it's like it's not like the whole like nerds versus jocks versus whatever thing. At least from all the stuff that I've experienced, and even not just in school, but in society, in like workplaces, right? It's not about nice versus assholes. Although obviously there are some extremely nice people, and there are also pretty persistent assholes, right? But for the most part, people just don't care that much. It's like
Yeah, and I think also like the whole like nerds versus jocks like concept of bullying is like
yeah,
it's so like it is very like a late 90s early 2000s, you know what I
yeah.
mean? Like
And
bullying,
the issue is it's
like the reality of bullying
yeah.
has gone like anybody that has like you said, anybody that has witnessed or experienced bullying knows that like it's not about like giving
Pushing
a
people into
kid,
lockers.
yeah, giving a
Or
kid like a swirly or anything.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
it is effectively like it is like
Ostracizing them.
harassment basically.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
is a sort of like kind of just consistent like snide remarks that make somebody kind of
Or isolation
doubt.
even. Yeah.
Yeah, but if it is like an active thing,
Yeah.
um, it is kind of just like these like little comments like that pile up to create a
Yeah.
sense of insecurity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like this whole like you're stupid and I hate you and you're
Yeah.
dumb. It's like
I will
it's like
shove you into this locker. It's
yeah,
not like
it's like little comments of like why are you so fat, or
yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah
And the jock might not even think much of it. He might just be
yeah
like, if when later when he's confronted, you'd be like, well, oh, he's just like, it's not that bad, like whatever, right?
yeah
But it is again that bad, right? And that's the thing. It's like people don't. It's not that people are like, oh, I'm a jock. And when I see a nerd, I will laser onto him like white on rice and shove him into a lock. It's not. They just
yeah
don't care. Like, they don't care. So I think this was another disappointing attempt. I really wish that more authors would try this sort of premise, but I hope that unlike Oregairu, unlike Chiramune, that they would really hone in on what sort of things are like today and what actual societal interactions are, and not this again, like fucking Spider-Man movie esque. Like, oh no, I'm the nerd at school. Now they put something into my shoes. Like, no, like fuck off. That's not. That's just no. So that's sort of my thoughts on Chiramune. I think overall, it's an extremely distasteful source material, story structure. That's only really kept up by the sheer consistent quality of its audiovisual production. Um, and I think at this point, the only score that I will give it is a 3 out of 10. And the three mostly comes from the audiovisuals. It's a very disappointing series overall. I hope the author does not continue on this track, or if he does, if they do, they do a little bit more research next time. So very disappointing. 3 out of 10. So yeah, that was Chitose-kun wa Ramune bin no Naka, also known as Chitose, is in the Ramune bottle. Again, light novel original, adapted into anime by Feel Studio.